Frankly, when I first looked at the story, it seemed a little strange, and to quote someone in the documentary, a little foreign, a little weird, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to get involved in it.
I had heard of the persecution of Falun Gong. I'd seen some footage of that on television, and as a yoga practitioner myself, I just couldn't understand, on one level, why the government would persecute people for self-improvement.
The more I read, the more I researched, the more there seemed to be, gee, there's this story that is remarkable and horrifying, and which has gotten relatively little attention. Documentaries give you the ability to take a big bite. So there are certain topics that it's like, wow, I'd love to do more. Most of my career was 90-second stories, 2-minute stories. And frankly, you can tell a lot of stories in 90 seconds or 2 minutes. This one, pretty difficult to tell in 2 minutes.
Journalists are perhaps the most cynical, the most disbelieving of any population. And to meet journalists who were utterly convinced that this atrocity was going on and perhaps still is, was very interesting and impressive.
When I first talked to Ethan Gutman about this, and of course he's written about this more than any other journalist, and his initial reaction was, well, you really can't do this in a documentary. It's too complicated of a story. And in a sense, he's right.
The tragedy of this is that the victims never emerge alive. So how do you can't have a first-person testimony. So you have to look at what else is around it.
Once I found out about Ethan and found out what he was doing, I realized here's our conduit into the story. In part because for an American public TV audience, they sort of know who Ethan is. I mean, not Ethan in particular, but, you know, the hard-charging reporter, the guy who does work all by himself, the guy who causes trouble, the truth teller, the truth seeker. That's a character they're familiar with. So, you know, we have the story of the journalist, the skeptic who sort of stumbled on the story. We have the story of who I call Dr. Zero. It's, you know, Enver Tohti. He's did field surgery, organ removal from a prisoner who had just been shot. We did a story about a woman whose father was one of the first to be arrested in the Falun Gong crackdown. We did a story about the human rights lawyer who dug away on this. We've done stories about a reporter who is writing for a paper that most Americans have never heard of, but who has written extensively about it and even been recognized by the Society of Professional Journalists. We kept on finding interesting stories that we thought would help give people an idea of the big picture.
You know, one theme that came out in the interviews, which I never expected, was some of the people that are actively engaged in fighting it have Jewish heritage because of what their families suffered in the Holocaust.
One of the stories that we stumbled into was the story of an Israeli doctor, a very unexpected story because that's not what the story is about. The story is about China, and it's about political dissidents, and suddenly there's this Israeli doctor, and we talked to him in San Francisco. It was perhaps the most meaningful hour that I spent with somebody.
He was so horrified by the fact that one of his patients could have a heart transplant scheduled on a specific day and time that he knew it could not be ethical. So he researched it and was able to get Israel to change the law. Now, for a country like Israel that is not exactly celebrated for its human rights victories, I think that's quite impressive. And I hope that other countries will look at that case study and think about what could be done.
Every story, I think, in this documentary is remarkable in its own right. But the one that I keep going back to is Enver Tohti. And in part because he saw and took part in something that virtually no one has been able to talk about. You know, I'm an ex-reporter. I still have a lot of friends who work in the newspaper world, TV world. And whenever I, over the past few months, have said, oh, I'm working on this story, and I tell them what it's about, almost without fail, they're like, wow, I've never heard that. And these are people who are in the media, okay? So, and they're saying, wow, that's awful, I've never heard that. The people I want to see this story are those who haven't heard this story before. Sure, if you've heard of this story and you're interested in organ harvesting, you're interested in China, yeah, please watch the documentary, because I think there's things in there that I hope will illuminate. But I really want the people who have never really heard about the story, or just sort of vaguely heard about, oh yeah, I heard something about that. Those are the people I want to watch.